I would agree that it's complex in the present situation. From the Palestinian perspective, we were a people like any living in our country, and invaders came from the outside. They came with a plan and with an ideology, but to confuse that or to conflate that or to mix it up with it being complex in origin is an injustice to our people.
So, hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Book Café Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Nizam. And in today's episode, we'll be talking to somebody whom I can only describe as a true modern day polymath because he's not only an author and an activist, he's also a musician and a surgeon, the phenomenal Doc Jazz. And I'm extremely pleased to have him today as my conversation partner. So, Doc, a very big welcome to you. And thank you for doing this. How have you been?
Thank you for the invitation, Omar. It's lovely to be in your podcast, and we had some interesting conversations before, and I hope we can continue it here in the presence of your fans and your followers. So I'm sure it's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. So, Doc, I have to say that I have to confess, first and foremost, that in the past 6 months, I've taken the time to self educate myself about the entire Israeli Palestinian conflict, or rather, the Israeli occupation of Palestine, which I think is more appropriate. And I've read no less than 20 books to ensure that I'm up to speed with regards to everything that's been going on. We've also had 10 guests specifically on the show to talk about Israel Palestine. But I'm surprised to say that you are, in fact, the first bona fide Palestinian that we've had on the show because all of our previous guests have either been Israeli Jews or Jewish authors and activists. So I really do appreciate the time that you've given and for helping us rectify this small blind spot that we've had on our show so far in actually hearing the Palestinian side of the story from Palestinians themselves. So, Doc, as I said right in the beginning, the introduction, how do you juggle so many hats? How do you go from being an activist to an author to a surgeon and to being a musician? How do you juggle all of this? Do tell us that.
I never have an answer to this question, and the reason why I don't really have an answer is because I don't consciously do this. I never decided to be any of the things that I am as a condition. To start with, I'm a Palestinian, so I think if you're a Palestinian and if your country is in this situation and for so long, that you have an obligation as a young man. That's when I started as a young man to engage in that and to speak about that, especially if you see that world politics is geared against you. The choice will be between silence and hiding. And as you have noticed, this is not in Palestinian spirit. So that is one thing. As for being a musician, I think that's just a gift from God because I never had any music lessons. I don't also come from a musical family or anything. It's just something that God has implanted in me as a talent. And for some reason, I discovered that I can play almost any instrument that I lay my hands on. And it also, by itself, developed into songwriting. And you write what you feel. You write what you feel about. So that developed into writing about songs about Palestine. And as for being a surgeon, that's actually maybe the most predictable one because I come from a very medical family. So many people in my family study medicine, myself also a doctor. So I studied medicine because I wanted to be a surgeon. It wasn't that I studied medicine because I wanted to study medicine and then became a surgeon. But Alhamdulillah, that also has worked out, and I've been a surgeon for many decades now. And I just felt that I have to mobilize everything I have for our cause.
Absolutely. So it's putting all of your skills to the test and using it in favor of your people. So I think that's absolutely wonderful. So, Doc, I just want to touch upon another guest that we've had on the show. As I said, that we've had a lot of Israeli Jewish guests, and one of the most prominent guests we've had is Mr. Gideon Levy, who works with the Haaretz newspaper as a columnist, and he's also a co-owner in the newspaper. And when we had him on the show, he explained to me that, Omar, in order for anybody to understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there's no one book that can ever explain this reality because it is so complex. The best thing to do would be to actually come to Israel-Palestine and see for yourself. Would you agree with what Gideon has said with regards to this being such a complex reality that only seeing it with your own eyes can give a holistic picture of what's going on the ground?
It really depends what he means by that. If he means that through the books you won't get, the full picture, and you will get, there are many things that you need to see, really understand them. I could give an example. If I describe a surgical operation that I do, and if I describe that in words and you read about it, you have a certain understanding of it, but it won't be the same if you actually attend the surgery. So I don't think that what I don't like as a common premise, which usually comes from the side of our opponents, is to try to present the reality of today as something which is complex in its origins. I would agree that it's complex in the present situation, yeah, but to confuse that, or to conflate that, or to mix it up with it being complex in origin is an injustice to our people. From the Palestinian perspective, we were a people like any living in our country, and invaders came from the outside. They came with a plan and with an ideology. It wasn't like that something accidentally then evolved from that, but they came with a plan and a strategy to create a state where which is exclusively for Jews, for Jewish people, and where people of different background are only at best allowed a minority, but can never be demographically contesting the the numbers of the people who came from the outside. So it will try to present that or something complicated. Then the agenda at is to confuse people and to make it unclear for them which side they should choose. But if we look at things from the lens of justice, then everybody will understand that people just living somewhere and being invaded and then expelled is a grave injustice, and there is no reason nor a justification to complicate that.
For sure. Yeah, I fully understand where you're coming from, Doc. And if I can just push back a little bit on this point and play devil's advocate, a lot of people who are on the pro-Israeli side will say that, well, actually, they were the original inhabitants of that piece of land, and they were forcefully evicted by the pagan Romans 2,000 years ago. And so their coming back is actually them being the indigenous population that's coming back to rectify a 2,000-year-old historical wrong, and that the Palestinians are actually just Arabs who came with the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. What do you say, Doc, to those people who believe that there was never anything called a Palestinian people, and that the Jews are the indigenous people who are just returning to the land of historical Palestine? Your thoughts on that, please.
Well, first of all, I don't engage in these kinds of conversations with these people because, again, this is a ploy to justify something which is inherent wrong. But also the other part which is wrong about that is that coming back has never been the issue. We never said that that Jewish people can't live in Palestine. The difference between coming back and taking over the whole country and throwing out the people who live there now. So even if, and many people want to discuss with them whether they are or not the indigenous, whether they are genetically connected to the land, to the original the Jewish people who lived in the region. I don't like these discussions because they take away from, it's actually the trap. Even if they are or are not genetically connected to these people, if, for instance, African Americans would want to go back to Africa, then, and if they happen to find out which part of Africa they are from, then that still doesn't give them the right to overthrow the regime and take over the country and people who live there. But if they would say, hey, man, I feel that my roots belong here, can I live here? Then this is a question which should be politely asked. And the answer in most cases would be yes, sure, go ahead. But if you come with an agenda to ethnically cleanse people and to impose your exclusivity and your even genetic superiority with these kinds of crazy, ridiculous, psychopathic ideologies, then you should not expect the indigenous people to just take that lying down and allow you to do whatever you want, because that's not how the world works.
Yeah, well said, Doc. I think that you've put it very succinctly and eloquently. And this is one of the stumbling blocks that I always come across whenever I engage with the pro-Israeli side, and they'll always push back with this question. So, Professor Dr. Ilan Pappé, for example, we've been very privileged to have had him as a guest on the show as well, does look at it through the lens of settler colonialism. And is this the way that the most Palestinians see it as well, including yourself, that this is a settler colonial project that we're looking at and that has been unfolding for the past 75, 76 years? Your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, it is undeniably settler colonialism, a special version of it. The people who are engaging in this settler colonialism are claiming that they have an original birthright to be in the country. This is not what the Americans, the current Americans who came white Europeans from Western Europe, mostly Anglo-Saxon in the beginning. They didn't claim that this land was originally theirs. They just had but they had the same type of promised land kind of idea. They called it manifest destiny. So they place it in a social Darwinist kind of context where that this is progress and that they have a duty to do it, a duty even to ethnically cleanse the indigenous population, which they did in a massive way, which is which is basically swept under the rug by our modern mass media and our modern history books, just mentioned as a tragic episode at most, and not as a huge, humongous injustice, which it actually was. When they add that story of another story to it, with the promised land, giving it a religious angle, saying that this is the promised land by God, and thereby, and then using the Bible in a very wrong way to try and convince others who also believe in the Bible, namely the Christians of the West, that their cause or their what they're doing is actually has a religious justification. So it's, this settler colonialism is the right terminology in my view, but it requires these footnotes in order to illustrate the vastness of the intricate nature of how it is being justified.
Yeah, for sure. And I do thank you for that, Doc, because I think that this point sometimes gets a bit contentious as to whether this is just settler colonialism or something else. But I think that a lot of academics who are being very fair to this story of Israel-Palestine definitely do side with what you've said about it being a settler colonial project. And I just want to read out something from the 1917 Balfour Declaration. As we know that Lord Balfour was a spokesman for the British government, and this is specifically for the people who believe that there was never a region called Palestine. So let me just read it out to you. So it says, it's November 2nd, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this project, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I would be grateful if you could bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. So when you have the word Palestine written twice in the Balfour Declaration, Doc, does it ever frustrate you to encounter people who say that this region was never known as Palestine, but that it used to be Eretz Israel? Do tell us about that.
No, actually, to be honest, Zionists say never frustrates me. What frustrates me is what they do. And what they do is take our country, expel us, subject our people to the most horrible human rights violations thinkable, mass murder, imprisonment. These are the things which frustrate me. What does frustrate me is that people are willing to engage with them and walk into the traps of these discussions that they lure them into. Like, for instance, I never write tweets that defend that there was a Palestine because it's just a historical fact. And if you enter into this discussion, then you have already acknowledged that you've made it disputable. It's not at all was a Palestine. What they try to claim is that that it was never an independent state. So what? That has nothing to do with the rights, with our rights, which are violated. By the way, severe violation of the Balfour Declaration. So, of course, we hate the Balfour Declaration as Palestinians because it opened the door for the Zionist invasion. But there are clauses in the which are ignored by those who celebrate that declaration, and that makes it even crazier. But I'm not going to discuss with any Zionist ever, and I never have, whether there was a Palestine or there wasn't. It's in the history books, and they like to put everything up for grabs, which doesn't suit their narrative. And I refuse to walk into that trap. And if everybody did, then they would be talking to walls and they would eventually stop talking. But because everybody keeps giving them a platform for that, and because everybody keeps engaging in these discussions with them, they know that you need to make all the facts disputable. And that is the basis of their Hasbara approach, their propaganda approach, the way that they can keep the world community confused about things that require no confusion whatsoever.
Absolutely. And I'll just disagree with you a little bit here, Doc, because I just happened to read Professor Nur Masala's book, The Palestine, a 4,000-Year History. And he did, in fact, mention of an independent Palestinian state. The name actually escapes me, but the ruler's name was my namesake, Omar. And it was probably sometime in the 17th or 18th century, where he had a state which was sort of a loose connection to the Ottoman Empire, but it had a lot of autonomy. And that particular state actually lasted for 50 years, which is even longer than the British Mandate, which only lasted for 30 years. So as I said, I just finished reading the book, and I could be wrong about it, but I'm pretty sure that Dr. Nur Masala had mentioned that there was in fact an independent Palestinian state, but that's another discussion for another day. So let's continue with some of the points that you mentioned. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, we can. You see, my point here is that if we say that, if we counter with that, which is of course a historical fact again, then they could say, almost sovereignty, but it wasn't a state. So, because what does it matter whether it was a state or not? It's just a completely irrelevant issue. There are people living in that land for hundreds of years. I can trace my own family presence in the area back to more than 1,000 years. And we were we were ruled over by forces greater than ours. This applies to almost any place in the world. That kingdoms change and types of governance change, and there are conquerors, and you're not always in charge of your own area. That doesn't mean that other people have a right to come in and kick you out. So again, it is a distraction from the crime. I bring everything back to the crime itself, and it has always been the fact that this area has been called Palestine. It goes back very many thousands of years, and whether it was a state or not is not even 99% irrelevant. It's 100% irrelevant to anything.
Yeah, for sure. And I completely agree with you on that, Doc, because if I could just give an example from my own history, the modern nation state of Bangladesh is an independent sovereign nation, but it's not a Bengali state. It's a People's Republic, which happens to have a majority Bengali population. But just because we didn't have a state before 1971 didn't mean that we, as Bengalis, didn't see ourselves as a nation. We saw ourselves as a nation when we were still a part of Pakistan between 1947 and 71. And prior to 1947, when we were part of India, British India, we still saw ourselves as a Bengali nation. And that nationality was always there, no matter how dormant it was. So I completely understand that these are all talking points which are very distracting, and it distracts from the crux of the issue, which is land theft. So let's fast forward a little bit, Doc, to 1948 and the UN, decision to actually partition Palestine. Can you very quickly tell us why this decision to partition it took place, and why didn't we actually have one democratic state right from the get-go? Your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, because the shortest answer is because they never planned to. When they came with that plan, they are basing it on Zionism. In the original thesis of Theodor Herzl, Der Judenstaat, which is the foundation of the Jewish state, he has designated the borders in there from the Euphrates to the Nile. And so if you come with that goal, then any conquest of any piece of land to work towards that goal is something you will put in your pocket. And you have the nations behind you, which at that point in time isn't the United Nations of today, because many of the nations then were still colonies. And so it was a very Western dominated, which came right out of the Second World War. And all these factors were conveniently abused, I would say, in order to establish a first conquest. So they come with a plan which is unjust in itself, because it gives much more land to the Jewish invaders than the actual land that they own at that moment, or where they inhabit at that moment. So there is no logical. It would actually be ridiculous and completely not understandable if the indigenous people and the Arabs had accepted that plan. That would be very strange. This would mean that if the United Nations now suddenly decided to give hands to a population of Basques who live in the south of France, and they suddenly get all the southern provinces and almost 50% of France, that the French should later on be blamed for not having accepted that. So again, it's a talking point which is introduced by Zionists all of the time. The Arabs did it, and there would have been there wouldn't have been, because your plan still is, even today, is to take all of Palestine. And now they're becoming more explicit about it, because one thing we can give them as a compliment — I don't give them compliments easily — but they are extremely patient in the execution of their plan. They're willing to take decades to do it. They're not as rushed as other people might have been. And we know that the call for Great Israel, as it's called, from the Euphrates to the Nile, is now echoing loudly again in Israeli government circles, with their soldiers even carrying badges of the map on their shoulders, on their armbands, and with various explicit statements of people from the Israeli government and other leaders about this, and including the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and replacing it by the Third Temple, which are all old goals of Zionism, not new goals, sudden ideas that they suddenly came up with, see that they have the upper hand.
Indeed. So Zionism has done nothing but bring rivers of blood, as I think that a very prominent ultra-Orthodox Jewish or Hasidic Jewish organization had stated over and over again. So it really surprises me that this history seems to be lost on the people on the Zionist side. But let's fast forward to 1967, Doc, and I'm just trying to touch all of the historical flashpoints. If you were to look back at the events of 1967, where prior to that, Gaza was under Egyptian occupation and the West Bank was under Jordanian occupation. But at least with Jordan, The people of the West Bank were given Jordanian citizenship. And of course, Professor Dr. Avi Shlaim had written a book called Collusion Across the Jordan, where maybe the Jordanian monarchy from the very beginning did want Jordan and the West Bank to be one entity. But in the case of the Gazans and the Egyptians never gave citizenship to Gazans. Can you, just from my knowledge, because I haven't found this information anywhere else, what was the reason for that? That why didn't the Egyptians take the same cue as the Jordanians and extend citizenship to the people of Gaza back in 1948? Your thoughts on that, please.
Well, you can see that after the foundation of the Zionist entity, the neighboring Arab countries all had different ways of dealing with the issue. For instance, we can also ask, why were Palestinian refugees in Lebanon not given rights? Actually, they almost had no rights. And then you compare it to Syria, where they were practically given citizenship, but with the mentioning of Palestinian in the passport. And then you have Jordan, where the ones that there were also given nationality in concurrence with the ones that were still in the West Bank being given the Jordanian nationality. And you can see that all these Arab nations had a different situation, but especially in the beginning, most of it was aimed at trying to keep the Palestinian nationality alive, Palestinian identity intact, and their presence on Palestinian land. These are the two goals that every Palestinian, regardless where they live, hold in their heart. Geopolitics is very complex. There is always a mix of let's say, motives which are selfish, and this is normal. This is human. Also, the nationals of a certain country expect their government to serve their interests, and at the same time, there were higher political goals which had more to do with the stability of the region and with the fact that the Zionist project should not be rewarded for its acts.
Indeed. And thank you so much for that, Doc. So as you said that, geopolitics is a complex business with competing motives, and sometimes motives do dive tail. And just coming back to my own history as a Bangladeshi, one of the biggest reasons why we became an independent nation was just because our interests happened to coincide with the interests of a regional superpower like India. Hence the reason why they supported Bengali nationalism and our independence. And so voila, post 1971, it just took 9 months for us to achieve independence, thanks to the military might of India right next door. And I can tell you that a couple of times we're also very indebted to the Soviet Union for vetoing resolutions for a ceasefire. And if any of those resolutions had happened, that we may never have become independent, and we may still have been a part of Pakistan. And speaking of vetoing resolutions, Doc, how complicit, in your opinion, is the American guerrilla that is standing right next to Israel and vetoing and protecting them every step of the way from trying to bring a end to this conflict and to this occupation?
I don't know if you've seen the cartoon that I have posted on Twitter, and I've posted it several times in several places, a cartoon that I drew in the 2011. And that is a cartoon of, let's say, someone depicting an Israeli who is holding a T-shirt with the American flag, and that depicts how I see that. So, if America was truly an independent force, our own choice wants to have an Israel in the Middle East, and there are many people who believe that. I tend to call them Chomskyites, because Chomsky is a big proponent of this theory, but he's far from the only one, and not that way at all. I see it as the Zionists having achieved dominance over American politics in such a way that the will of average American citizen isn't even involved in what's happening. We've seen that from the way that AIPAC and other lobbying groups of the Israel lobby control the Congress members and others in the American political system. And that means that American forces, the American army, is at the back and call, basically, of the Israeli state. You've seen the discussions. You've seen how Netanyahu ambassaded Biden for holding back one shipment of heavy grade bombs, a drop in the ocean compared to the incessant flows of arms from the United States to Israel. And that just illustrated to everyone something that they should have been able to see forever. And that is that whichever arms Israel wants, and by the way, these arms have been released now. So what was it all about, really?
Yeah.
They're now being shipped. So the big gorilla, I mean, he has teeth if he has to wage a war in Iraq for them, for the Israelis, or has to attack Afghanistan for them, also for them, at their service, and big teeth and big muscles, and he slams around him like a crazy animal, and does that at the beck and call of the Israeli leadership. I'm not making it up. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's facts, and people see these facts from different angles, and depending on their basic worldview, they fill in the blanks. And the blanks are, in my opinion, not really blanks. To me, it's pretty obvious.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's frankly disgraceful the way that the AIPAC lobby not only buys off American politicians, congressmen, senators, etc., but also tweeting about it on all of their social media handles, that this is 100% of AIPAC candidates have won their primaries, etc. So it is legalized bribery more than anything else, right? So it wasn't always this way, Doc, as far as my knowledge goes. Prior to 1956, when Dwight Eisenhower was still president, he had warned his countrymen, he'd warned America and the rest of the world about the dangers of the military-industrial complex. But I think that sometime after 1956, after he had left office, the pendulum shifted and the US became very pro-Israeli in their endeavors. But I just want to stick to Palestine and fast forward to 1987. So the Intifada that took place, the first Intifada in 1987, was a grassroots movement that happened spontaneously in Gaza. And they decided in 1988 to declare a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders, and also recognize Israel for the very first time. When you look back at that time period, Doc, how detrimental or how important was it, or do you agree with this at all, that even recognition of Israel by the PLO in 1988 or 1993, was it good for Palestinians, or was it a two steps backwards? Please tell us about that.
Well, first of all, let me say Intifada being grassroots, it definitely is grassroots, but it wasn't completely without influence of the PLO from the beginning. I don't know if you read up about that, but maybe you should research Abu Jihad from Tunisia and see what his role was in the Intifada. The point which is more relevant in your question is whether political moves like recognizing Israel and defining the borders of Palestine in an area which is smaller than historic Palestine, whether that is a smart move or not, or whether I support that or not. You see, the point here is that I believe that unilateral recognition is a very strange concept to start with. If you're an invaded nation and and they have full military dominance over the entire area, then making a move like that is a challenge to the political system in the let's say in the world geopolitical space. You're actually coming forward with a compromise which is not yet backed by anything from the other side. And if you do that, you're taking a very big risk. So am I in favor of doing that? Well, I can tell you, and maybe you've seen my interview with George Galloway, I was never in favor of that. And here's a but. It's something that I didn't say in that interview because we talked about other things. I don't consider it not having had any positive at all. I just think that the positive effect of it doesn't make up for the negative effects of it. The negative effects of it were huge, have been huge. We're still suffering from them. But I would never want to be completely blind to the positive effects of that and the subsequent Oslo Accords. They have a very small positive component in them, which I'm not a fan of mentioning, but just to be fair, the fact that Palestine now is seen worldwide as a real entity by a majority of nations in the world, even as a political entity, so as a state, quote unquote, not really yet full statehood to most of the countries that really have a lot to say in the world, is owed to that move. If that hadn't been done, and if efforts hadn't been made for this diplomatic / political endeavor, then I think it might have affected the body of pro-Palestine supporters that we have in the world. They have never as big as they are today, and it's very, very sad that this is owed to the most brutal genocide that we've ever seen on our mobile phones. But the basis, having basis in the international political sphere, at least has given people something to stand on. So the negative side effect for the Israelis of those Oslo Accords has been that there are people who actually believed that there was already a state of Palestine. If you speak to less educated people who are not so deeply versed in this situation, they actually thought, but wait a minute, there's already a country called Palestine. It's like they think the two-state solution has already been effected. And coming from that side, they are seeing what the Israelis are doing in the occupied territories. For us Palestinians, everything is occupied territory. But what is commonly referred to as the occupied territories is an infringement on that statehood of the Palestinians, and therefore adds to the magnitude of the injustice that is by the population. So that is the small. I must still call it small. The small contribution of such moves. And I don't know, and if you want to know why I call it small, it's because I'm skeptic of the effects of public opinion upon what actually happens. I have not seen the mobilization of the masses of the world have any effect on the aggressiveness and the sheer hysterical psychopathic violence which is unleashed upon upon our people in Gaza and Gaza, or in the West Bank. It hasn't had any effect at all on that level, and we have to be very realistic about that. Though we appreciate, of course, that the majority of people worldwide now support our struggle.
Yeah, for sure. And if I can just add a little bit to what you've already said, Doc. I mean, specifically with regards to the 1993 Oslo Accords, when I look back at that time period, I was completely aghast and surprised that the recognition was between Israel and the PLO, not Israel and Palestine, and hence why that confusion amongst a lot of lay people, that they assumed that the two-state solution had already been implemented and that the Palestinian Authority, the government that was created, would only last for 5 years, and then after that the states would come into fruition, or Palestine would come into fruition. But and once again, if I can just chime in for the benefit of our audience, from my own history, that when the British Empire had become so big to manage, to be able to not manage by themselves, the British very cleverly created something called the ICS, which is the Indian Civil Service, and they actually employed Indians to help the British run the empire. And so when I look at the Palestinian Authority, with all due respect to the people who are involved with it, it seems nothing except a recreation of the ICS to help prolong the occupation and to manage the occupation. So, history is just repeating itself, and the Israelis are simply taking it out of the British playbook. So I really do feel for the people of Palestine, and the fact that, there's so many promises that are being broken, but at the end of the day, we can see that we're heading towards another implosion. Of course, we had that with the Second Intifada in the year 2000. But just very quickly, fast forwarding to present day, Doc. Once again, let me just recap for the benefit of our viewers and listeners that as a layperson, I see this ending in only 5 ways. The first way is a two-state solution, which is not going to happen because Israel has already torpedoed that with their settlement projects. The second is ethnic cleansing of Palestinians by Israelis, which could happen under the fog of a bigger war. The third is genocide, which we're already seeing in Gaza. The fourth is the status quo, which is apartheid in the occupied territories. And the fifth and final solution, which I think is probably the only solution which should have happened back in 1948, is one democratic, secular democracy for everybody who lives between the river and the sea. Would you be a proponent of the one-state solution as well? Do please tell us about that.
Yeah, this is also a very popular and to be honest, very important question. Let's go back a little bit in history and see on which principles the Palestinian Liberation Organization was founded, and you will find that this was exactly their goal from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So if people, again, after the Second Intifada, so in the beginning of this century, reverted back to the one-state solution versus the two-state solution, it was because the two-state solution was obviously a flawed principle, that it wasn't going to work. So it wasn't that people came up with a new idea. The Palestinians, who for a short while had bought into the dream of the two-state solution under a better-than-nothing kind of concept, now realized that it was going to be nothing anyway. And then they just went back to the original struggle.
Right.
We have never had an ideology in Palestine among our Palestinian people that that sees certain people as subhuman or ourselves as superhuman. These type of ideologies are exclusive to Germans in the Second World War and to Zionist Jews in the current time frame, is a concept which me as a Palestinian and as a doctor and as a human being is just a flagrant insult to humanity. It is something which is under no condition ever acceptable, and therefore I personally can guarantee you and all other Palestinians with me that we will never do that same thing to the invaders. We will never see them as subhuman, even if they see themselves as superhuman. This is their mistake. We don't have an ideology that supports that. You know very well, as I do, that Islam does not support that either. Christianity does not support that. And we, the Palestinians, are mostly Muslims, but up to 20% of us are Christians. Mm-hmm. We also don't have any ism which rules our ranks. People try to label things like Islamism, that kind of nonsense. These are just invented concepts which come from outsiders who want to label us in a negative way, but it's not any ideology that drives us for our struggle. What drives our struggle is purely standing up for ourselves. What drives our struggle is that if somebody invades your home, you don't take it lying down and you want your home back. That is all what is happening. There is no ideology behind it. So this means that if we win, and we should win, and inshallah we will, and it might take a very long time, and nobody knows how things will go. But that means that the outcome of that, of us winning, would by definition result in that one state situation where we do not, we will implement just as a natural result of who we are, we will implement something which is fair for all religions and all ethnicities. Palestine has all a cosmopolitan area. We've had pilgrims coming from all over the world to visit the holy sites, which are holy for 3 religions. We have many indigenous Palestinians who are of not all of the same faith. And it has never been an area which has any type of exclusivism until the Zionists came. They're the first ones in this history who came there and said that some people are better than others, or like Orwell said, some animals are more equal than others, or as Hitler said, the white people are superior to others and Jews are subhumans. all that nonsense, all these ugly ways of thinking do not exist in the Palestinian conscience. And we, at this point, have no other option than to think only about activities for liberation, because we don't have let's say, ideological program that drives us.
Mhm. Absolutely, well said. And of course, there's also social Darwinism, like you mentioned earlier, that also had that has had something to do with the psyche of the 18th and 19th century. Sorry, the early 20th century European mindset. Doc, it's been fascinating. It's been wonderful. I've learned so much from this particular episode. But and I pretty much exhausted all of my questions with regards to Palestine. But just before we let you go, as you know that our podcast is about books, and so at the end of the day, we have a couple of staple questions that we love to ask all of our guests, specifically with regards to books. So with your permission, I'd just like to ask you two of them. And so the first staple question is, are you more of a fiction person or a nonfiction person? What genre of books do you enjoy reading?
Actually, I'm since many years, since many decades, almost the only thing I read is political analysis. So that would classify, and of course, apart from medical literature. So, but I think that falls under non-fiction. But I am a
Mhm.
big fan of one work of fiction that I would like to mention here, and that is Lord of the Rings by Tolkien.
Okay. Lord of the Rings. Well, you just can't go wrong with Tolkien. So that's awesome. Ghassan Kanafani, I've heard his name prop up a lot, and I'm not familiar with him as much. But can you tell us a little bit more about Ghassan Kanafani, the great Palestinian author?
Yeah, Ghassan Kanafani was not only a writer, he was also an activist
Mm,
of the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And he wrote one book which is extremely famous, which is Rijal fi Shams, which is
mhm,
actually about the expelled Palestinians who were expelled from Palestine, trying to build a future for themselves in Kuwait by smuggling themselves into trucks in that area. And Ghassan Kanafani was deliberately assassinated by the Israelis
mm,
in Lebanon. And if you look him up and find video excerpts of speeches that he made or interviews that he made, he's an extremely impressive person. And
mm,
well, that actually enables me to make one point that the Palestinian people are full of Ghassan Kanafanis. Now, I
mm,
don't want to take anything from his stature as one of the most impressive literary people that our people have produced. But what pains me is that Palestinian speakers and thinkers are not given a stage generally in the world. This is a very colonial mindset, and that colonial mindset unfortunately rules the waves worldwide. And if you are really free of this colonial mindset, and you know that there is a people that is struggling for its rights, then you take these people seriously. You don't talk over their heads with anti-Zionist Jews from America and Zionist Jews from Israel and thinkers and political analysts from America and Europe. No, you will talk to these Palestinians themselves, who are an extremely educated people. I mean, if you would line them up, and then I'm talking only about the best and the most eloquent ones, could fill a stadium. And
mm.
none of these are frequently featured in in talk shows. I mean, now I'm talking to you, so thank you for that. But it's not just Ghassan Kanafani who's impressive. The ones who are made the most famous, like Edward Said, for instance,
Mm,
they
right.
are just the tip of the iceberg. These people represent a small peak of a huge iceberg, which
Mm,
I invite all the people to explore. Find them. You will find them easily. There are so many, so eloquent speakers who know exactly how to explain the Palestinian cause and who should be pushed forward and put in the middle. And I'm not talking about myself. There are people who
mm,
are there are people who are much better than I am. Give them the spotlight and make sure that the Palestinian voice itself is represented on the world stage. And this is something that people who create independent media like yourself are able to do. You are able to do that. And the other independent media, which are famous and popular, like some of the Western popular media, George Galloway already does it. I don't need to encourage him. He's actually one of the few who always makes sure every now and then to feature a Palestinian speaker. But the other ones like Judge Napolitano, Duran, stay away from Palestinians, even though they're an excellent platform of political analysis. But nobody can say that there is a shortage of eloquent speakers who are able to articulate the Palestinian struggle. And one last thing to say about that is that it is different when you let a Palestinian speak, because we will say things which are different from what these other people talk about, because we have skin in the game. We are fighting for what is ours, our land. We are fighting for our own rights. And that angle should never be brushed aside. It is a mistake. It is actually serving the goals of the Zionists to keep us brushed aside. The only thing to really push us back against Zionism is a spotlight on Palestinians. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's very eloquently put, Doc, and I really thank you for that. And yes, thank you so much for enlightening us about Ghassan Kanafani and all the other Palestinian authors. As you mentioned, the tip of the iceberg, Edward Said, what a giant intellectual he was. And I love his book, Orientalism. So I'm sure that, there's a lot of other authors from Palestine that are still yet to be discovered by the rest of the world. But I'm really grateful to have had your input on that. So let me just sign off with the second staple question that we have. And let me give a preamble by saying that a lot of our guests have said that it's a very tough question, but given that you're such an avid reader, Doc, I'm pretty sure that you can give us a very good answer to it. And the question is, if you could select a book that you feel that every young person should read at least once in their lifetime, it could be a fiction book, it could be a nonfiction book, it could be about Israel and Palestine or not. But if you could pick at least only one book that is both edifying and useful, what would be your pick?
So are you basically giving me a chance here to promote my own book?
By all means, please go ahead. Yes.
I wish people would read my book, which is called Understanding Palestine, because it explains, especially the last, let's say, it explains the post-Oslo era and illustrates, I think, in a very simple and clear way why things went wrong. And if not my book, then excuse me, but I forgot the exact title. But I would say the flagship book of Professor Rashid Al-Khalidi, who was a professor in America, I think, at Columbia
the
University.
100 Years War on Palestine.
Yes.
That's the book, right? Okay, I love that.
Yes,
book.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah, because that is a book by a Palestinian, written from a Palestinian perspective, and really takes things back to the roots. And like I said, the Zionists are always trying to keep everybody busy with side discussions and with little, deliberately confusing talking points. And if you stick to that book itself, then you at least have a good foundation, and then you are able to take any discussion back to the Nakba. Every discussion that we have on Palestine should be taken back to the Nakba in order to stay realistic. And there's no better guide for getting a good grip on that than Professor Khalidi's book.
Absolutely. And Doc, thank you so much for that. Dr. Rashid Khalidi, what an amazing giant intellectual he is. And of course, I've been very privileged to have read most of his books, and I really hope to have him on the podcast as well at some point. But he's extremely busy with his academic work as well as his activism. So I really appreciate you highlighting his books for our audience. And so on that note, let me just finish by saying that for our viewers and listeners who have been with us all this time, thank you very much for staying till the end. If you are watching this on YouTube, do please be sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with as many people as possible. Let's try and get Doc Jazz's message out to the entire world. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there who will have a better understanding of the Israeli occupation of Palestine after listening or watching this episode. Doc Jazz, sir, I really want to thank you as well for being our first Palestinian guest on the podcast. It's been a long time coming. You're a very busy person with all of your activism, your writing, and your surgery. So I really appreciate it 1,000% that you've been able to share your knowledge and your wisdom with our audience in Bangladesh as well as the Bengali diaspora. Thank you very much for your time, and I really hope to have you back as soon as I've finished reading your book for a second episode. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure, and I just want to say to give my warm greetings to the people of Bangladesh. Many Bangladeshis where I live, and I always appreciate how warmly and sincerely they support the struggle of our people. So I have to give some warm words back to them.
Thank you so much.